Freedom Fighter Radio. Coming to you live from the heart of the Great White North. We gotta get everybody to share the link, folks. We are going to have a great freedom panel tonight in the show from coast to coast to coast, all the way from Newfoundland to, we don't have British Columbia, but we have Saskatchewan, Ontario, no Manitoba tonight, but we have, who am I missing? Oh, we have somebody from Mexico. Folks, this is going to be a very exciting radio show with video tonight, folks. Share the link. We're just waiting for everybody to show up on our backstage. I'll give everybody on the comment section to start filling up our comments. What did you feel when Justice Rouleau and the Prime Minister said, well, the threshold was met. The highest threshold of invoking the Emergency Act was met. Did it make your blood boil? Did it make your blood boil, or is your blood already clotting? Just kidding, folks. Share. We're about to get started here. Share the link. We have a coast to coast to coast freedom panel on the show. We're about to get ready. We're about to get this started. I like for all our live comments to flood our comment section. I know that we are trending on Rumble, but unfortunately, apologies to our Rumble viewers. We are not able to integrate your comments on our dashboard, but just keep your comments coming anyways. I'll try to flip over to Rumble a little later to read your comments, but keep it coming. We're about to go live now. There you go. It's Freedom Fighter Radio coming to you live from the heart of the Great White North, the heart of the true North, strong and free. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. It is 6:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's 8:30 already in Newfoundland. We have a very beautiful panelist from Newfoundland tonight. It's still quite early. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Friesen from Saskatchewan. I think it's 2 hours early. It should be like 4:30. Oh yeah, Mr. Carpe will be joining us tonight as well from Alberta, which will be 2 hours early as well. So while we're waiting for all of our special guests to come on the show, I just want to kind of preface our episode tonight that the Freedom Panel used to be a small segment on our regular show, but I think it is by popular demand. Everybody wants to see more and more of important voices from coast to coast to coast all across Canada. And in the future, we are going to integrate some of our brothers in the fight and brothers in the faith also from the United States of America into this show. And we'll try and do this every 2 weeks for you folks, where we get everybody on a round table and have a discussion of important topics and important thoughts that are usually spoken in many of our kitchen tables from coast to coast all across this country. But of course, those are not the money makers or the policy makers that supports the narrative and the agenda of the internationalists. Thus, they're not going to cover all of these conversation on the mainstream media. But I know that coast to coast, all across this beautiful country of ours, on kitchen tables, these are the conversations that we're having all over the country. And if your blood is not yet boiling, when the government's overreach and heavy-handed treatment of peace-loving Canadians are now being justified by Justice Rouleau, I think there's a lot of implication for future emergencies and also for future protests. These are some of the questions we need to ask some of the very important voices who are going to you will be hearing speaking on this show tonight. Because like you, I'm your fellow ordinary Joe who has a lot of questions. We go by feel. We know that in our spirit things are not right, but it's a little bit difficult to articulate because we are not experts, right? We are the ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians who feel something is wrong in our spirit, but with the help of our special guest tonight, we are going to be able to articulate what what is going on and how are we going to present this to neighbors and friends, church mates, family members, and friends that needs to be red pilled. So without much further ado, I think hopefully we have two latecomers, but hopefully they'll come in just before we get continued. 4:30 in Alberta, 5:30 in Saskatoon. Yes, sir, Mr. Mark Friesen. Chris Smith is 5:30 in Mexico. Dina Churchill is 6:30 p. 7. Oh no 8:30 in Nova Scotia. So folks, you're listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio. Tonight is Freedom Panel or Freedom Roundtable. Let's get this show started right now.
Freedom Fighter Radio, what is up? Whoa!
Shout out to Freedom Fighter Radio. And Joe, you're doing great work, brother, and I love it. All right, always.
Make sure you listen to the Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Show.
I'm on Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Joe Show. That's quite a mouthful.
Yes. Hey guys, this is Chris Sky. Listen to Freedom Fighter Radio. They're here today, back in the blue, and so am I.
Please consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.
All right, folks, welcome back. This is the Freedom Fighter Radio. Give me a second, folks. Some technical issues here. I couldn't see all my notes here. All right, ladies first. Actually, sorry, folks. There's just a little bit of blackout on my screen here. I couldn't see my dashboard. All right, folks. Okay, there you go. Apologies. Ladies and gentlemen of the Freedom Fighter Radio, Raven Dana Metcalf was responsible for the opening of extortion investigations in 9 provinces across Canada, ran for PPC for St. John's, Newfoundland MP position, marched with Canada Marches across Eastern Canada. That's James Stops, folks. And I believe that she was the love partner during that walk for James. march with Canada Marches across Eastern Canada, serve the College of Physicians, local MHA, and pharmacists. Currently working on the National Citizens Inquiry is a support to create awareness for the emergency use authorization mandates. Please welcome to the show, Madam Dana Metcalf. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the show, Dana.
Thanks for having
Oh,
me.
I forgot to ask you if we can get you on landscape, that will be better for our show. Thank you. And next on the list, Mr. Mark Friesen, aka the Grizzly Patriot. Mark is a retired corrections officer of 25 years and is now a small business owner in Saskatoon. Mark is also the founder and CEO of Canada's only NGO, non-governmental organization actively opposing the global agenda called the Forum for Canadian Sovereignty. He works tirelessly in educating and informing Canadians of the consequences to the globalist agenda in the hopes that Canadian voters will go to the polls with good understanding of what ails our nation at this time and who to vote for to restore our nation's values, the values of freedom, liberty, sovereignty, justice, equality, under the law, prosperity, and truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Friesen. Hello, hello, sir.
How's it going?
Let's take the banner. Apologies. Let's take off all of this frame so we can see you.
There we go.
There you go. This is what we get for a one-man show. I'm the director and producer and everything. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Mark Friesen. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thanks for
All right.
having me.
Awesome.
Good to see you,
And
folks.
somebody who has
Hi, Dana.
your monitor loud, please turn it down because it echoes.
I'm gonna fix that right now.
Thank you, sir, Mark.
It's probably mine.
And one from the Veterans for Freedom joining us for the first time on the Freedom Fighter Radio Freedom. What do you call this again? Freedom Roundtable. Mr. Andrew McGilvray is a co-founder of the Veterans for Freedom. He served at the Navy and was a naval warfare officer and is now retired. He served between the years 2009 and 2021. Born and raised in Scarborough, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Are you still there? Oh, Mr. Drew McGilvray. Hello, sir. Welcome to the
Thanks for
show.
having me.
Awesome, awesome. So I tried to squeeze in an email there for Mr. John Carpe. He's the only one who's not on the backstage yet. And sure, we can say former candidates for, MPP Oakville for the New Blue Party of Ontario political science degree, small business owner and former political advisor for the political entities in Romania after the freedom revolution in Eastern Europe, fighting for individual rights and liberties, and a strong advocate for a limited government and a strong federalist system of the government. My fellow podcast co-host on Enemies of the States, the New World Order. He is also a serial entrepreneur. Welcome to the show, Mr. Doru Gordon. Hello, Doru. How are you, sir? Awesome, awesome. And so the only person we don't have so far is Mr. Carpe. Hopefully, he didn't lose the link to the StreamYard. Before we continue, let me bring in two videos that I think is making a lot of people's blood boil. And sorry, folks, that I couldn't seem to find things that I have already ready here. But my folders, where are my folders? Apologies. Amateur time on the Freedom Fighter Radio. All of these were prepared earlier, but for some reason. Okay. Apologies. My visibility is so bad tonight with all of my folders, but okay. Let's start with the ladies first. Madam Dana. Let's go one at a time, and maybe let's just begin with Where were you when you heard the final conclusion? Justice Rouleau said that the highest threshold was met. Did it make your blood boil? Did you agree? Did you disagree? What were your thoughts? And then slide into your opening statement of your entire. Take a minute to talk about your opening statement on the entire freedom. Oh, sorry, the entire inquiry. What are your thoughts?
I think anything that's conducted by our government at this point should be in question. Um, I was I was at home with my family when I heard the results of the inquiry, and was I surprised? Absolutely not. I was personally invited to participate in the Emergency Act inquiry, and I declined to do so for many reasons. Number one, um, the system is broken. You know, democracy throughout this whole pandemic has been very consistently failing the citizens of our country. And, you know, fundamentally, I think the number one thing for me around the citizens inquiry that never came up the whole entire inquiry is that even prior to when the citizens inquiry was about to commence, it was already public knowledge that the foundation for the citizens inquiry should never have even happened, because it was all based on fraud. It was already public knowledge that the citizens had been segregated and um, treated disrespectfully by our government based on politics. So I wasn't expecting too much from the citizens inquiry. Therefore, I wasn't surprised. Did it make my blood boil? Yes. Is it going to stop our movement from trying to change the face of our country? Absolutely not.
Thank you for that. That's 1 minute. And next on the line, Mr. Drew. Thank you for joining us today for the first time. You're the co-founder of Veterans for Freedom. What are your first impression? How did you feel when you first heard this announcement? And give us a minute of opening on your general thoughts about this inquiry.
Yeah, it wasn't no, just like Dana said, no surprise. It didn't even make my blood boil at all, because we knew had a very good feeling what the answer was going to be when they released it. We had done some of our intelligence summaries where we did research on Justice Rouleau. We did research on the senior counsel in the inquiry. Her name is, I think, Shantona Chowdhury. She was a hardcore lockdown advocate, hardcore vax advocate. And so you look at everyone who was involved and you dig in to their history a bit, and you can find out exactly who they are. Our open source intelligence team did over 1,000 pages of open source intelligence for the PIOC, and you could read through it all, and it wasn't looking good with who was involved. So it was no surprise from us. But like Dennis said, we just have to. It's the ebb and flow of battle. We got to continue to fight.
And I have to apologize because all my views have been messed up on my dashboard. I apologize. And we have one special panelist that I just forgot to introduce. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Smith is the Brit behind the Atlantic Underground podcast. His 40-year obsession about discovering the truth has set him down so many rabbit holes. And today he relies upon the knowledge to connect the dots of modern-day warfare upon humanity. He spends the last 10 years in Canada and saw the writing on the wall. He recently moved to Mexico, has given him the freedom of speech that Canadian censors want to remove. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris has heavy hitters on his podcast. I think he is one of the best freedom podcasters in Canada. Had Dr. Kerry Maday, what do you call that British guy again? And just amazing guy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Chris Smith. Chris, I apologize about that. sorry. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really good. Yes.
All right. So let's go to you next then. Where were you when you first heard about this conclusion, and did it make your blood boil? What were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I was probably on Facebook. It seems to be where the most of the announcements come from these days. No, I mean it didn't make my blood boil. It was to be expected. You know, we've got basically the government investigating themselves with the justice system and everyone on the payroll. So at the end of the day, it was to be expected. There was never going to be any justice served. It was a token gesture probably to appease many people to make them think that something was going to be done. And sadly, nothing was done. It was just a dog and pony show from the beginning. It was, that they want to bring people in to give, personal testimonials on what happened. And none of it seemed to make any difference whatsoever. But that's what happens when you're all paid from the same source.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Again, apologies for missing out on introducing you there earlier. Next, let's hear our 1 minute opening statement. The Grizzly Patriot from Saskatchewan. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Friesen, again. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Again, similar to everybody else, I mean, I knew going into this that it wasn't going to amount to much, that the outcome was already set in stone. As Dana said, our democracy is broken, our country is broken, and so really, did it make my blood boil? Not at all. I fully expected the outcome that we got. The one thing I will say, though, is for anybody that was sort of paying attention to this, and I'm not sure how well viewed it was, but it did shine a light on some of the corruption in Ottawa and how they treated a peaceful protest. I mean, in and of itself, the protest in itself exposed a lot of corruption just within the media and how our media handles things and creates narratives and propaganda. And so that was one of the takeaways from all of this is we exposed, reality versus what the media wants to impress upon the people. And I think a lot of people woke up because of it. So, it is what it is. It was a process that was doomed to have the outcome that it did, and it is what it is.
All right. And Mr. Doru Gordon is my co-host for the Enemies of the State New World Order podcast. Thank you for joining me, Doru. How are you doing? And 1 minute opening statement, your overall thoughts on the inquiry.
Yes, let's start with Ecclesiastics, which says that nothing is new under the sun. So basically, we're dealing with a tyrannical state here. People try to put it under the rug, says, no, look, we have a process, we appoint someone to investigate, everything is good. It reminds me of my country in Romania, when the government investigates itself all the time and everything was fine, nothing to see, move along. We trample all the rights of Canadians. We have to remind everybody the preamble of our charter says that whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Now we all clearly see the rule of law is gone. Everything politics. This government, again, the leftist. Let's call it the left government. It's on the left. They consider the state the solution, and they will use the force of the state to impose their will. So obviously, it's a charade. I mean, the Trudeau Commission or Rouleau Trudeau is the same. Yeah, the name kind of rhymes. But at least everybody now clearly see that we are dealing with a tyrannical state, a totalitarian state, which basically push the rule of law under the rug. It's no more. It's no more. The rule of law, it's gone. So I've seen this movie before. Has been happening in the Eastern Europe for so many years, and it's starting to grow very, very rapidly here in Canada. So that's my opinion in it. We are on a path of totalitarian regime.
Thank you for that, Doru. And we see Mr. John Carpe has already joined us. He's just getting settled.
Today, the Public Order Emergency Commission stated that the very high threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act was met. He found that what we experienced last year was a national emergency that threatened the security of Canadians. Our job as a government is always to keep people safe, and invoking the Emergencies Act was the necessary thing to do to remove the threat and to protect people.
There you go. So I'm just waiting for Mr. Carpe to get settled on his seat. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Carpe. Was a little late. It was just running behind here. But I want to begin with that statement. Does it feel like to you that Justin Trudeau is like a little boy given, a toy gun or keys to the pickup, an 11-year-old given a keys to the pickup? And what are the implications now that we know in our hearts, in our spirit, that even the police said that there is surprisingly no violence. But hearing that, following up the conclusion of Justice Rouleau, what came into your mind, Dave, when you heard the Prime Minister talk like that?
Drew or Dave? Which guy? Who's Dave?
Oh, sorry, Drew. Apologies, brother. Drew.
No, it's just par for the course, right? Like they're slowly doing this. They're slowly squeezing the Canadian citizens. They're getting more and more centralized power, and this is just a victory for him, right? Like this guy's like some narcissistic traitor. He says he's a leader. It's funny because when I was still in the military, probably from about 2018 on, all of us just referred to him as the traitor to the nation. And none of us, so I can say none of us, but a lot of us in the circles that I was working in just really had no respect for him or his government. And we saw what was coming early on. And that's why so many military people hundreds of vets were supporting the truckers in Ottawa, because we can see exactly the type of guy he is in the government. Like the rules don't apply to him, scandal after scandal. And so it was really no surprise from our end.
All right. So I can see that Mr. Carpe is ready to join us. John Carpe is a Netherlands-born Canadian lawyer, the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Reform, also known as the JCCF. We saw JCCF very active during the inquiry. He's the founder and the president and a newspaper columnist. In 2021, Mr. Carpe made Canadian news and took a leave of absence from JCCF after he hired a private investigator to follow Manitoba Chief Justice, who was presiding over a COVID-19 related court case in which Carpe was legal counsel in. Mr. Carpe, I just took a Wikipedia description as my introduction tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. John Carpe.
Hey, glad to be with you all. Glad to be with you.
Awesome. So, Mr. Carpe, where were you? This is the first round of questions. Where were you when you heard the conclusion of Justice Rouleau when he said that the highest threshold was met and the invocation of the Emergency Act was justified? What did you feel when you heard it? And give us a minute of an opening statement on your overall thought on this entire inquiry.
Well, it was disappointing, but also not very surprising. It seems that Justice Rouleau is very much part of the establishment when he refers to the protesters in Ottawa that were there last year, January, February 2022. He says repeatedly in his report that this was because of misinformation and disinformation. So he drops a lot of hints to the effect of saying that he really agrees with the government's policies, the lockdowns, the travel restrictions, the vaccine passports. He seems to be in agreement with all of that. And it's quite interesting that he says on the one hand that the government was justified in declaring a national emergency, but then he also says that he feels very reluctant about that. And he is not properly applying the legal criteria. The legal criteria require serious endangerment to the life, health, or safety of Canadians. Serious endangerment. Now, I understand that a lot of people, some people in Ottawa, I don't know how many, but some people in Ottawa were inconvenienced by the protests. But to have some people suffering inconvenience in one city is not serious endangerment to the lives or health or safety of Canadians across the country. Further, Justice Rouleau faults the government for being incompetent, but then seems to ignore the legal criterion is not whether or not the government mismanaged the situation, but whether the government had lacked the authority to deal with it properly. And that was not the case. The provincial government in Ontario, as well as the City of Ottawa municipal government, had lots of tools in their toolbox which they did not use. So it's a very disappointing report, but fortunately, the Justice Centre has started a court action 12 months ago, February of 2022, and we have taken the Prime Minister and the federal government to court and are seeking a declaration that he acted illegally.
That's great. Let me play a video of your fellow JCCF.
Justice Rouleau also makes a distinction between peaceful protesters and what he says was happening on Parliament Hill. Again, acknowledging that many people had come out to be peaceful, but there were other elements amongst the protesters. And he basically says that he doesn't accept the fact that the whole protest was a peaceful action.
Well, then he's redefining the English language, because what we know is the crime statistics were down. We know that there was no bombings, there was no fires, there was no windows broken. There was an absence of criminality. There was an absence of violence. That was the sworn testimony from the OPP, from the RCMP, from the Ottawa City Police, from CSIS, and so on. So, see, that's what's concerning here, is that we're using new terms to define violence. It wasn't actual violence; it was felt or perceived.
In the novel 1984 that was written by not Aldous Huxley, the George Orwell, in 1984, it seems like everything is the opposite. The Ministry of Love is the Ministry of Hate. The Ministry of Peace is the Ministry of War. When we are changing terminologies in our society, anybody can come on first. Do you think that these are real telltale signs and evidence that we are under a tyrannical society, a tyrannical government? Anybody would like to jump in?
Sure. I think it's a clear indication that we're under a tyrannical government. I mean, I was on ground zero with the Ottawa convoy. And if you want to talk about violence, then let's talk about the threat to the peaceful Canadian citizens that congregated in Ottawa. You know, we were denied the ability to provide them with facilities. You know, we had false flags that turned out to be, orchestrated by our federal government. You know, we were the peaceful ones, and the good people were framed to be bad, and the bad people were framed to be good. I mean, like I said, the number one thing about this, Emergency Act inquiry is nobody took into consideration why we were there. Why were we in Ottawa? Let's talk about that for a second. We were in Ottawa because Canadians were, our businesses were decimated, our families were destroyed. Some people, were forced to take a substance and violate their bodily autonomy. We had every right to be there peacefully. And to say that we were there as an act of tyranny, I'm pretty sure that if somebody commits fraud against somebody else in any legal world, that we should have the opportunity to have our voices heard. And, I'm a mother of two, and that's why I was in Ottawa. But to see the inhumane treatment of Canadian citizens by the police and by the constant threat of violence, whether it was LRADs or the horses or the threats of taking people's children. Can you imagine that there was a threat of taking people's children to the point where we actually had to reach out to churches and stuff so that we could keep these people safe from our government? So yes, we are very much in a backward situation. And I believe that the Citizens Inquiry itself was positioned to give false hope to Canadians to believe that something was going to be done about it. And it's not. So it was fruitless.
Anybody wants to add anything on that comment?
I think it's important to point out that our system, the establishment, is corrupt, and it's not just within what we see with the convoy and the response to the convoy and the POEC. It's throughout. I'm presently going through the court cases in Saskatchewan represented by the JCCF. Thank you, John and team. Where I have what I consider to be God-given inalienable rights. I actually don't feel like I need a charter to represent that, although there is one. And within that charter, there's what's, section 1 of the charter, where governments, if they're going to limit our rights, for example, to protest, for example, to gather in numbers larger than 10 outside, those are all clearly defined under the charter. And if any government is going to limit those rights, then they have to demonstrably justify with evidence why they are limiting these rights. And no government in this country has done that to this point. I know in my case, all of the lower judges that are ruling against me, I consider them all to be bought off by the system. There's nothing unbiased about them. In fact, the Court of King's Bench made a declaration in this province that the government doesn't have to demonstrably justify limiting our charter rights. They just decided that outside of what it states very clearly within the charter. So this whole thing is upside down. It's so fully corrupt throughout Parliament, throughout our legislatures, throughout the justice system. Big changes are necessary, and big changes have to come.
Any follow up? Anybody wants to say something about that, Drew? Doru?
Well, we have
a couple things. So they have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there is a deeper philosophical approach here. You see, when we have our constitution or Charter of Rights, whatever we want to call it, the debate was back then if we do have absolute rights or not, if our rights are absolute or not. And then, for instance, compared to USA, they do declare them absolute in a sense. That's why they have the Bill of Rights there, and you cannot have the government infringe upon. Now, keep in mind, the Constitution of the United States has been done and then has been debated by what we call Calvinist Christians. And a way they started with a thought that the total depravity, we are fallen creature, therefore the government has to be limited. When in Canada and the British Empire, they started with the opposite concept of good governance. Therefore, our rights are to be limited and not absolute. And now every day we can clearly see how they are using the system, even though they have to have some thresholds on limiting our rights. They can just declare it, the threshold has been met. Right, it's simple. So basically, they corrupted the system. We don't have moral. We don't have too many moral people or that follow a good ethic, or the concept of rule of law. It's gone. We don't have it anymore. And I'll give you an example here in Oakville, where I live. Halton District School Board submitted a letter to the Minister of Education, Mr. Lecce, in Ontario, asking him to change the Ontario Education Act. And the reason they're asking to change the act is that the policies they enacted, the school board, contradict the law. In other words, I don't obey the law, and I clearly state this in my letter, and please change the law so the law will follow my actions. So it's the opposite. We are living in an upside down society, because you see, I'm coming from a communist country, and then I was born a slave, and I was being raising up as a slave of the state. We are turning, all of us in Canada, slaves of the state. That's the truth. Our institutions don't obey the law. It's a fact. They don't care about the law. So it's gone. I mean, now we have to start from scratch. How we, as Canadians, look upon what's the purpose of the state? What's the state for us? Who is the state? Because the Canadians have been educated for the last 50 years, and all started with Tommy Douglas in the 60s, where they stated healthcare has to be given by the state for free. The state will give you free education, free healthcare, free welfare. The state is everything in Canadians' mind. We are going on that route, and now we are reaping up the benefits of that. So that's the problem we have. And it's very hard for us. I'm coming from the outside, and I see how this country is turning into. And I try to talk to all my immigrants, friends, and all that. Gosh, we have to fight for this country, because it's going and it's turning into something that we already seen. It's very bad. So let's hope we can fight.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's a couple things there. So it's, our institutions, our government, the state, whatever you want to call it, it's definitely rigged against us, right? So it's the old saying, rules for thee, not for me. And you can just look at it for Jeremy McKenzie, controversial guy, Canadian veteran, been speaking out at the government for the past couple of years, and they've debanked him. So he's banned from FinTrack. He can't get a bank account. He has some obscure online banking account. He's gonna have to start using money marts and Western unions to cash his check or his pension check. And that's just them targeting any sort of political dissident who's speaking out against them. So it's just like they did Alex Jones in the United States when they banned him. It's like, okay, it's just Alex Jones. And then eventually a couple of years later, they're banning the sitting president of the United States. So it's starting with this, just Jeremy McKenzie. So it's Jeremy McKenzie today, me tomorrow, Dana the next day, John the day after, and they'll keep going. And that is what totalitarian and authoritarian states do, and to punish their citizens. And an interesting thing is that, I've been in some foreign countries and I've seen that sort of happen over there with some of these dictatorships and the way they treat people and that sort of thing. And the fact that it's happening here in Canada, it's a shame. But one thing just to keep in mind is it's not just Canada. With V4F, we've got a partner, what we call the Global Veterans Coalition. I think it's at globalveterans.org. And we are working with American vets, Dutch vets, Brits, New Zealanders, Germans, and we're basically publishing these reports every 2 weeks. And on those reports, which are submitted independently, so it's not like we read the UK's report and then write based on that. This is all from a playbook, and it's all across the Western countries. And you can see they're doing the exact same thing across all of the countries. And it's very interesting that, it's they're only targeting the Western countries. So the countries with the most rights and freedoms for their citizens, those are the ones being targeted. So it's across all Western nations, and it's pretty scary.
I'd like to hear a little bit more British Canadian accent into the show. So I haven't gone to you, Chris. What are your thoughts?
No. I mean, a lot of viewers who are watching this now are probably very savvy and understand exactly what's going on. For those that aren't aware, I mean, we focus on what the government's doing in Canada. But the main cause for concern has been the infiltration of the government in Canada by the Klaus Schwab crew of the World Economic Forum. I mean, all these young global leaders that are in the government, and we've got Chrystia Freeland now being part of the board for it. the whole agenda that's rolling forward right now, the whole problem that we're seeing happening in Canada is a group of unelected people pushing their ideologies on the country. And the problem is with those ideologies is that it respects none of the laws that were put in place for the protection of the Canadian citizens. So they're just going to steamroll right through any kind of constitution. And, I think what we've seen here with the inquiry, as I said before, it was a token gesture. It was just something to kind of appease the people, and people have them pinning their hopes on what was going to go on. But we are moving forward with what used to be Agenda 21 into Agenda 2030, the sustainable development. They want 15-minute cities. They want you to own nothing and be happy. And the sad thing is, removing people like Justin Trudeau, removing people who are in positions of power, who seem to be in charge, is not going to make any difference whatsoever, because they're just going to roll somebody else into that position who's going to push even harder for those agendas. And people really should now be turning their attention to the outside influences that are corrupting Canada.
100%. Couldn't agree more, Chris. And so we need to add this context even to COVID and the reason why the convoy happened, right? Ultimately, the virus itself was manufactured. It was released on the masses. All of this was a project. It was a social engineering and conditioning mechanism to do just that to the people of Western nations. Listen, in order for them to achieve the goals of Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, they need to dismantle all of what we claim to cherish in this country and throughout Western civilization: freedom, liberty, justice, sovereignty, equality under the law, prosperity, and truth. That's what they need to destroy and dismantle if they're going to achieve the goals of sustainable development, the 17 goals, which if you transposed it onto the Communist Manifesto, it's exactly the same thing on steroids. And so people really need to start to wrap their head around what is happening and why it's happening. There's no secret that this is happening throughout Western civilization. Drew was just talking about that. It's happening everywhere. This dismantling of what Western civilization represents. So this whole attack is coming from Agenda 2030. Everything about this was social engineering and conditioning the masses to accept the trampling of our rights and freedoms for what is yet to still come. That's all this was. That's exactly what COVID was designed to do, and that's to train the masses to accept this authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorship coming from an unelected, unaccountable foreign entity.
Good point.
I do not disagree with what the last few individuals have said, and I think we are in a very bleak situation. I would interject a little bit of optimism. We do have more free speech rights in Canada today than what people did in the Soviet Union and the communist bloc in all those decades, prior to 1991. It's been said that if you lose all of your rights and freedoms except for free expression, you can use your free expression rights to win back all the rights and freedoms that you've lost. Conversely, if you lose your freedom of expression, then you can't even defend yourself against other losses. Now, we've got serious threats to free speech in Canada. Even Justice Rouleau, recommendation number 53, basically says that the government should censor speech that the government deems to be false. Not in those words. It's very nice words. It sounds very flattering, flowery. It sounds very benign. It's about that we have to that misinformation and disinformation are serious problems, and so the government has to address these challenges. So it's dressed up nicely, but you've got this growth of hostility towards free speech and kind of a government knows best. All of that said, in Canada today in 2023, the fact that we are having this conversation together online, and this is, either live streamed or posted later or both, we are still a long ways away from totalitarian regimes in terms of how much free speech we have. And so there is a window of opportunity. There is a possibility to educate Canadians, or whatever country you live in. You can educate your fellow citizens about threats to freedom. You can print brochures. You can put them in mailboxes. You can set up websites. We have a lot of freedom of speech left. Some people would like to see it disappear. But we need to keep that in mind, that we are not destined to slide into the totalitarianism. It's the wrong direction that we have been going in, yes. However, it is not inevitable that things will get worse and worse.
My question for Drew. Drew, you being part of the Veterans for Freedom, you also have an ability to do what's a better word for it? Intelligence. I was about to say espionage, but no. Let's like you have the ability to do intelligence, and one of the fact finding mission you embark on is this meme or this rumor going around on the internet. People were saying, "Hey, Rouleau was related to Trudeau," and you guys debunked that right away. But with your ability to do some intelligence, do you see in your radar some of the activism, judicial activism, and all of these seemingly hijacked system that we have in Canada? Do you see in your intelligence fact finding foreign interference from internationalist forces like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, or the Trilateral, or whatever?
Yeah. So the Rouleau thing, I didn't want to break or burst Dana's conspiracy bubble there, but yeah, it took our guys about 30 minutes, and they pieced it together that they weren't related. So we have a team that we're building. It's called what we call PRB, or their Parallel Research Bureau. It's basically a bunch of open source intelligence guys who are going to be putting together additional reports and reporting on all three levels of government and that sort of thing. But the big thing that V4F is doing is basically building the battlefield picture for citizens, right? So we did a really good video that got a lot of views and reach called Canada Divided, where we sort of laid out the battlefield in terms of who's who in the zoo, the technocrats, the elites, the left-wing extremists, and that sort of thing. It's a pretty good video. And then just recently we did a very good video. It's probably the most important video we did. Is we had a former intelligence officer from the United States named Stephen Coughlin, and he was the J2, which is the intelligence branch for the Joint Chiefs of Staff down the United States. So a big deal. He was briefing the president and those people with intelligence, and we had him on, and he basically had this thing called commies. I think they titled it commies TTPs, which stands for Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures. It's about 3 hours long, and they break down exactly what they're doing to implement 2030 agenda, to implement communism for us and elitism for them. And there's about, I think, 14 different lines of effort that they focus on. One is language. I forget who was mentioning it earlier here, where they change the definition of things and then force you to adopt that definition in their favor. They use gender, they use race, they have these different lines of effort that they use. But the interesting thing is that they understand the battlefield and understand your with battle planning, you need to get inside the enemy commander's head, figure out what he's going to do, figure out what their capability and limitations are, and then build a plan around how to counter that. So that's one of the things that we are doing, is sort of trying to educate Canadian citizens about what the battlefield is, and then help them develop a plan or courses of actions of how to counter that. Now, in terms of foreign intelligence interference, it's pretty obvious. You don't need us to tell you that about the WEF, the CCP. They're starting to cover it a little bit more in the mainstream media. There was a couple of years ago where Rebel broke a story about them training Chinese pilots. 2016, the Chinese were invited to RIMPAC, which is all of our allies get together for the biggest naval exercise, or Rim of the Pacific, out in Hawaii. So it's been happening. They've just been playing nice. They've been getting into our sandboxes, and then they're stealing from us, stealing our trade secrets and everything, and taking off. So, and now they're going to be using that against us. So in terms of that stuff, we write about it on the Insums fairly often, but that doesn't make us sort of special for doing that. Everyone's knows about that. Mark has been talking about that for a while. Dana. So it's we have good intelligence capabilities, but we don't have access to the networks that we used to when we were in previously.
I want to bring this conversation back to what Mr. Carpe was saying, that free speech is maybe the last hope to win back our country or our freedoms. And yes, Mr. Carpe, you were saying earlier that we still are not in the same level as those totalitarian regime. However, I think the observation is there is the virtue signaling, the gaslighting, that even those who seems to hear something else because they've been brainwashed by social media or brainwashed by the prime minister's good wordsmithing. But with the question of foreign interference, we've seen many of the judges seemingly doing what they call judicial activism, just like with Pastor Art Pawlowski. Do you think that it might be possible that our judicial system is also being infiltrated by foreign influences?
Well, I think first and foremost, judges are human, so they are susceptible to the same prejudices, feelings, biases, fears that everybody else is subject to. So when the fear-mongering started in March of 2020, and we had the false and utterly discredited claims of Dr. Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London. He said that COVID would be like the Spanish flu of 1918. He said that over 500,000 people in the United Kingdom were going to die of COVID. He said that over 2 million Americans would die of COVID. And unfortunately, within weeks, certainly within 2 months, this fear-mongering was discredited by anybody willing to do some research. I mean, COVID is not the Spanish flu of 1918. COVID was in line with the Asian flu of 1957 and the Hong Kong flu of 1968. So yeah, it was worse than usual, but it wasn't anything that was claimed. Now, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the reality is judges are human beings. And so in the same way that you have very good and sincere and well-intentioned and intelligent people who, for reasons I do not comprehend, are just swallowing the government's narrative. So you have judges that are in a similar boat, and they became full of fear, and they completely embraced the government's narrative. I don't think for a moment that Canadian judges who are, well paid. There's a friend of mine was married to a judge, and that 20 years ago, his wife, who was a judge, was earning $350,000 a year. That was 20 years ago. So they're well paid. I don't think that anybody's slipping them an extra, $50,000 or $100,000 to rule the right way. But what's going to happen with time is that as we make the effort to educate our neighbors about the facts and the truth, as society becomes less afraid of COVID, you're going to see these judges gradually also letting go of their fear as well.
All right, folks. Okay. Who was jumping?
Yeah, John. Yeah, I was just going to say, if I could ask John there. I know you were saying there about the judges not being slipped any money, but I mean, the judges who are on such a high level of pay, which you mentioned there, would be seriously fearful for their job positions and losing that money. Now, the justice system within Canada falls under the Crown. And we've got now a new king in place in the UK, and King Charles, who is now obviously head of the crown, has massive connections going right the way back to the late 70s and early 80s with the World Economic Forum. He's clearly boasted what agendas he wants to put forward, and he is clearly supporting what they are doing. So the influence over those within the judicial system, right the way up to the highly paid judges, could come from an external source from the crown itself because of the sphere of influence they're having within the World Economic Forum. Do you think that's possible?
Anything's possible. It's not really known how much influence the king has, or Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, prior. We don't really know because they have private conversations with people. But I would say, regardless of how much or how little influence King Charles has, we still have this freedom of speech that we can use to educate our neighbors about, the truth about COVID, the truth about lockdowns, the fact that there's just no evidence that lockdowns saved lives, the harms that lockdowns inflicted, the massive human rights violations that the vaccine passports were, treating people like garbage based on a legitimate personal decision about what to inject or not inject into their own bodies. We've got unlimited opportunities to educate our fellow citizens, whether you're in Canada, the US, China, Germany, France. We can educate our fellow citizens about the injustice and the human rights violations that the lockdowns were. And neither King Charles nor Prime Minister Trudeau nor President Biden nor anybody else can stop us from educating our neighbors.
No, absolutely.
All right, don't go away, folks. We'll be right back. Just a short break here. And when we come back, we are going to ask the question, can we still trust the system? You're listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio, Coast to Coast to Coast. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. And tonight is Freedom Panel, Coast to Coast to Coast, all across Canada, from the east to the west. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these short messages.
A disturbing news. Doctors administer certain drugs even after the family have rejected it. Why? Because hospitals can charge $3,000 a pop for it. Meanwhile, they hid the fact that cheaper alternatives are available and it only costs cents. Do you know if you are paying the right price for your current prescription? Have you researched if there are cheaper yet equally effective alternatives? Call Shinlaza Pharmaceuticals at 1-800-206-0051 or email at info@shinlaza.com for a free consultation. Shinlaza Pharmaceuticals is owned and operated by a freedom fighter of the Freedom Community in Ontario.
Hello, friends. I am Derek Sloan, the leader of the Ontario Party. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Canada podcast, only here on The Ordinary Joe Show.
Now to talk about this, and his prophetic column in the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is Bruce Pardy, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, who is also the Executive Director of Rights Probe and a Professor of Law at Queen's University. I still believe in the system because I don't know what I would do if I didn't believe in the system. I don't know how I would handle that. I still believe in nonviolent solutions to problems. I still believe that our system may get it wrong at first, but eventually gets it right. I believe that the checks and balances, the pendulum will swing back. I believe those things, but it gets harder to believe those things. This felt like an inside job, felt like a stitch up.
Well, yes. I mean, I know it feels that way, and you may have an argument there, but what I'm suggesting is that that's not really what it was designed for in the first place. There were some really interesting moments and some very good testimony, including by some of the police officers and officials that appeared. I was quite impressed with some of them, and they made the point that you referred to. And in particular, some of them were very specific about the fact that they, in their opinion, there was not the kind of violence that the government alleged that there was that justified the invocation of the act. There was one OPP officer in particular who said that in the context of the Ottawa convoy, he said that he found the lack of violence shocking. In that kind of situation, he would have expected violence, but there wasn't any.
There you go. You're listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio. We have Coast to Coast panel in our show tonight. We have John Carpe from Alberta, Dor Gordon from Ontario, Mr. Mark Friesen from Saskatchewan, Chris Smith is joining us from Mexico, Drew from Ontario, and yours truly from Ontario. The last clip there we saw, it's almost like it's staring us on the face as civilized nation and civilized society. We'd like to trust the system. We'd like to be non-violent, civilized, non-compliant. I think is what Chris Kai would say. And yeah, we want to be peaceful, but it's almost staring us on the face that everything's rigged against us. Dana, what are your thoughts with the last clip?
Well, a friend of mine, Brian Peckford, made it very clear to me early on that civil disobedience is allowed. We're allowed to protest and demonstrate and do different things like focus on using cash, speaking our voice, and non-compliance. It's like, this system, we were sold into creature comforts, right? Like everybody wanted the free healthcare, the free education, and all of these things to happen. But what we have to now get comfortable with is using our voice to say no, and actually start speaking truth. Because even on this panel, like I believe we're being truthful, but we're still not opening up the concerns for the vaccines and what's happening to people. Like I think it's time for people. We're at a tipping point in our country where we actually have to start speaking truth. We have to start non-complying. We have to start demonstrating some small things like this civil disobedience. Like I have friends that aren't paying their taxes. What are they going to do? Throw us all in jail? Why are we going to pay taxes for them to cause tyranny upon us in this country? We're going to be all faced with an option. This is how I see it going. The systems are in trouble. So we're either going to comply with what they want, or we're going to have to prepare with how we live life outside of that system, because they own everything in that system. So if we want to send a strong message, we have to start by saying no, we're not doing any of these things. And I don't think our viewers on most of our podcasts are really experiencing the magnitude of what we're looking at. Like how many discussions have we opened up sincerely, about this scare of what's happening with these vaccines. Like we should all be as a team now working together to try to support the National Citizens Inquiry, because that's where they've now puddled all the information to get us and all the sleepyheads awake in this country. But we have to start speaking truth, be non-compliant, and focus on, what are we going to do if we're not going to win? I mean, everybody knows what the problems are. The people that are watching this podcast are most of the people that are awake. It's not the sleepyheads. We have enough with the problems, but now we need the solutions.
My next question will be for Mark. But before I ask my question, folks on the live audience, I would like to acknowledge our Freedom Fighter Radio listeners and also our Odyssey and our Rumble. I apologize that I cannot put your comments here, but people on the live show, I'm going to bring your comments after this last question. Mark, Dora was pointing out there earlier that, which I agree, when I used to be health and safety designate for a big company, the question was some of the places where we have accidents or safety issues, maybe because I used to work in a place where we have a lot of forklifts driving within the warehouse. And so we're designing the safety feature of the warehouse. Maybe a section is not safe, not because people are breaking the policy how to drive in that area. Maybe it's the policy that is at fault. Maybe the policy needs to be changed, right? So playing that last clip, it's almost staring us in the face that even the police were saying they're surprised that there's no violence, but the Justice Rouleau still said that it met the highest threshold. What do we believe here? People are confused with the double speak that we've been hearing from official channels.
Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about the system that we got into. you know, we're all part of Western civilization, which has ultimately probably been the best civilization humanity has ever known. And I'm not one of those that wants to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think we need to burn the system down like our communist friends would like us to do, and from the ashes comes utopia. I think what we need to do is root out the corruption. And we need to do that through what John says is through education and information, and sharing this education and information with courage and conviction, and get enough people to understand, what's really going on here, what's at the root of this, of all of these issues. And that root is Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development, SDGs. And so we need to really focus on what the enemy is and who that enemy is and what it represents and what it's attacking, and really share the message, share the information with our neighbors, our co-workers, our friends, our family, whoever it is, at any opportunity and every opportunity that's given to us. That's our job. Listen, we've abdicated our responsibility for decades to people we thought had our best interest at heart. Turns out they didn't. Turns out they've completely sold us out. Think about this for a second. In 1992, when Canada first committed to this agenda, did Brian Mulroney and his Conservative government come back and go to all of the people throughout this country to inform them as to the agenda that they just committed us to and the consequences therein? The answer is no. In fact, they did the opposite. They kept it from everybody and framed it as conspiracy theory if someone like myself were to talk about it. They failed. So now it's up to us to re-engage, take back our responsibility, share as much information as absolutely possible with as many people as possible. And until we hit that critical mass of understanding, we're going to continue to tread water. So it's up to each and every one of us to continue to share the information while we still can.
So, Chris, the justice just said that the highest threshold has been met, which also translate that peace-loving Canadian jumping on bouncy castles and having barbecue in Ottawa were extremists calling for an emergency. Do we just need to learn how to behave better as Canadians, or it is the system that needs to change and to get fixed?
I think Canadians need to really stand up and bring the fight to everyone, which, we saw what they did in Ottawa, and that needs to continue. What everybody on this panel here today are a great voice for what's going on out there. And the fact that those voices are heard by many people is fantastic. But what we really need is for the people out there hearing what we're saying, hearing the interviews that we're doing and the experts that we bring on to talk to. People need to take that information and we talk about a lot of people being asleep in Canada and a lot of people not being awake to what goes on. And I often wonder, what would it take to wake those people up and let them actually hear what we're saying, hear what the experts are saying. And I think it's the duty of everybody that watches our podcasts, listens to the interviews that we do, to take something away from that and just go and talk to people. People need to become brave and not scared to talk to somebody in the street, the neighbors, the friends, the families, because they fear that the criticism or what they think about them is going to be something that will be embarrassing. The time for that embarrassment is over. What is heading towards us is some serious and major things that are going to affect people's lives for the worst. And just having the ability to speak to people is what I want people out there to do. I want them to talk to everyone. And the thing is, they may dismiss what they initially hear. So if you're talking to one of your neighbors who watches the news and the mainstream media and they believe exactly what's going on, well, you can tell them differently, and they may dismiss you as a conspiracy theorist and somebody absolutely crazy at that point. But if everybody starts talking to people about that, the next time they talk to somebody down at the post office or somewhere else who is saying something very similar, then that's two people who have said it. And when the third and the fourth and the fifth person starts to tell them exactly the same story, then it's going to be very difficult for them to relay that in a way that, you know, these people are conspiracy theorists, these people are absolutely crazy. And I think to conquer what we're seeing, just people using their voices to talk to people, to build back the community spirits and start to talk to people about it and not fear about the repercussions or what they think about you. And in this, I think we can make forward the changes that we need to see.
Drew, you're one of the co-founders of Veterans for Freedom, very active during the truckers convoy and also when James Stops arrived in Ottawa, keeping the peace. And Veterans for Freedom were the loudest voice in saying, we are going to do this peacefully and we are not going to call for violence. You actually called out another sort of like a branch off who were sort of planning violent response to the government heavy-handed overreach, and you rejected their ideas. However, my question to you, Drew, did you experience combat? You were a combatant during your
No,
service?
I was Navy. I was in tactical boarding operations, so I haven't, but a lot of our members have.
All right. So my question for you is that we are a civilized country. We want to follow the rule of law and be civilized in our disagreement, in our dissent, in our pushback against heavy hand. But when do that line gets crossed that we are so civil that we are just allowing the breach on our basic human rights to defend ourselves and to protect our privacy, our autonomy, and allowing that breach to just take over us? Is how do we be civilized at the same time protect our basic human rights?
Yeah, so we learned something from James Topp about a book called From Dictatorship to Democracy by Gene Sharp. And one of the things he says early on in that is that any violence used against the state will almost always result in the perpetrators losing, and then the state using that as an excuse to double down even harder. So we definitely push no violence. Chris Sky, his United Non-Compliance is actually very powerful messaging. Some people like the guy, some people don't. Me personally, I don't care. His messaging is on point for that. So mass sort of civil disobedience, United Non-Compliance is big. You talk to some of our guys in combat, and the reason we did call that person out is because we had evidence sent to us that they were going to, be violent. And I heard it with my own ears. So we try to only punch up, but that was done for protection of the freedom movement, I guess, for lack of a better term. So in terms of violence, look, everyone has a different line in the sand. I know what my line in the sand is. My personal line in the sand is any sort of forced vaccination or being moved into some sort of camp. Okay, that's my personal line. I think a lot of people, their line in the sand is the gun grab, especially with people out in Alberta where they're already angry. I think that's their line in the sand. So everyone's got a different line. And, I think because if you just look historically, first they come for the guns and then they come for the land and or the farms. So I think a lot of people know that and they see that. So I believe personally, because we're really trying to push the solution-based approach to this, and I've talked to Mark about this a couple times, is localism will counter globalism. And so in terms of getting out and talking to people, and I know we're with John as well, freedom of speech. If you look at our webpage, it's still under construction, but when they say, what do you mean about freedom? It's like freedom of speech is the number one thing that we push. And if we can get out and communicate to people, like our group, we are now going out and doing meeting with community groups and setting up our own group. We are the group that we spoke to a couple of weeks ago that I guess started. It's already up to 150 people. We talked to 130 people in Hamilton, and we're educating them face to face. All this online stuff where you can get canceled, you don't know what you can say, or you get your YouTube account suspended. We need to get back into meeting people face to face. And with us, I'll talk to anyone. I don't care if it's some left wing extremist, whatever. I will talk to anyone, whether it's face to face or online on a podcast. But we need to get back having conversations face to face and not being afraid to tell them what we think. But 100% just going back to 100%. You want to be nonviolent and united non-compliance to push back against the state.
John, from the legal perspective, when does that line get crossed? When do we say, well, I'm being raped? We are being raped up front. When do we say, okay, maybe they won't rape us hard enough, or they will let up on the raping? When do we say, okay, this is it? This is I have the human rights to defend myself, to defend my family, to defend my livelihood from a legal standpoint? When is that line crossed?
Well, I think it's extremely important to refuse to comply with unjust laws to the extent that you are able, right? And everybody is in a different situation. I mean, some people, they got injected with the mRNA, because they just could not see a way out of having to support their families. So a lot of people got coerced, and that's very sad. But the important thing is to recognize that these God-given freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly, the right to bodily autonomy, these do not come from government. The preamble of the Charter says that whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and then that's the opening, and then after that, you get a list of different rights and freedoms. So it becomes very hard for a tyrannical or totalitarian government to keep the people oppressed if you've got people that are no longer obeying unjust laws. And so it's very important. Myself, I was, over the last 3 years, I've spoken at many rallies where, technically there is some unscientific health order that said that people could not gather outdoors in, numbers greater than 10, and it's just ridiculous rules and regulations. And I always start the speech by saying the highest law of the land is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, not the health orders of the Chief Medical Officer, not the threats of the police, not the Premier, but it's the Charter. So people, as much as they are able, people need to just practice those rights and freedoms. And when there's an unjust law, then disobey the unjust law.
Well,
peacefully.
Yeah, but if John, if we get silence, we get the platform, we get shut up and tape on our mouth, how do you disobey that? Kind of.
Well, you keep on speaking. I mean, you might need to set up a different email or create a new website. You can go door to door with and put pamphlets and brochures in mailboxes. The Justice Center has got volunteers have distributed hundreds of thousands of brochures about the right to bodily autonomy and vaccines and the dangers of centralized digital ID. So depending on circumstances, you keep on exercising your free expression rights as best you can under the circumstances, whatever those circumstances might be.
I believe that Mark Friesen would really agree with me that the technocracy is a new ball game, a new kind of jungle to navigate through, because like, for example, we have a combined 100,000 followers who click the like and click the follow on our multiple pages, but technocracy sets in and big tech sets in and say, you know what, we don't like your speech, we're going to shut you up, and they're going to collude with the big gov and say, you know what, this is as far as reaching you can, right? So before the last segment where we time flies, so we're going to ask everybody to take a turn to give a closing statement. Any last thoughts on free speech?
So they they've been rattling their sabers a little bit in terms of free speech as it relates to online activity and bringing in the CRTC and regulating what can be said and live streams and all these things. And so that's a threat. That's at stake. But at the end of the day, I'm not threatened necessarily by that because, as John says, and as many of other people on this panel agree, I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to keep hosting town hall events where I can say whatever I want. And that's the most powerful platform that anybody can create for themselves, is live and in person at a town hall, wherever it is, and then speak the truth without limitation. I can do that. And I'm looking forward to the day when people get offline and start attending more places in person and together and forming these communities. Because as Drew said, the antidote to globalism, this hyper-centralization of control, governance, and resources, the antidote to that is community.
Exactly.
Is self-reliance, self-determination, independence, and community. And that's what humanity will naturally and organically move in that direction when this top-down tyrannical authoritarianism comes about. We will adapt. Humans are great.
I totally agree with you, Mark. I'll debate you a little bit on that point because I totally agree with you, and I also say the mantra that the answer to consolidation is deconsolidation. The answer to centralizing is local approach. However, I think, yes, we can have that town hall offline meeting, but when they get their way, it will be within your 15-minute scope that you can speak your town hall offline.
So I completely disagree because I think humanity, when it comes to these 15-minute prison districts, when it comes to humanity, we're going to dictate to the government what they're going to be allowed to do to us. I can tell you right now, there's people in my community that are already planning to tear down the barriers, tear down the infrastructure that they're going to use to try to keep us in 15 minutes. It ain't going to work. I'm telling you right now.
So that's what I'm saying too.
Yeah.
I agree with that it cannot just all be speech. We got to do some action. We got to do some physical tearing down of some of this physical 15-minute barrier. Before we go on the last segment of closing, giving everybody a roundtable closing, Doru, I know that you are deep research into this, and I haven't come to you a lot today, but you think the system needs to be respected as it is, or should we hope as citizens of Canada maybe have a referendum to rehaul the system? Are you frozen, Doru? Okay, apologize, folks. I think Doru got frozen. All right, so don't go away. When we come back, closing remarks from everyone, and thank you for tuning in. All those who are tuning in on Odyssey, Rumble, Brighteon, that is where you can share this link and not be censored, just like the town hall, the physical town hall that Mark is talking about. Don't go away. We'll be right back after the short message.
Imagine that the power grid was totally wiped by an EMP weapon of an enemy state. Your stress level will go to the roof, your patience will be tried, you will have to think about both your own and your complaining children's survival. If you don't survive, your children won't when they are left on their own. Teach your children how to have the mentality of being survivors through a fun, children-friendly guided outdoor adventures with basic survivor mindfulness integrated in the fun outing activity. Call my friends Ernell and Victoria who are experienced survivors. Call them at 905-252-8009 or email them at northernpacificcottages@gmail.com.
we have a brand new podcast in collaboration with one of our very important collaborators. So, without much further ado, I would like to introduce our main collaborator for a brand new podcast, Enemies of the State, the New World Order. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Doru Gordon.
Yes, and to put it simply, the recipe is always there. Create a crisis. You have to present there is a crisis in society. In order for the state to go bigger and to grow, you always have to threaten people or to instill fear. You have to be fearful of greedy capitalists or the greedy businessman who wants to take money away from you.
There you go, folks. You've been listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio. This is the last segment. We're going to offer everybody to do a last closing remarks. But everybody, please share. That's another way of sucker punching the algorithm, is to manually share the link everywhere on our Odyssey, our Brighteon, our Rumble, and everybody everywhere else that is not big tech tyranny. So, again, as always, ladies first. Closing remark. Let's start with our friend, beautiful Miss Dana Metcalf.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for having me on the show. I'd like to finish off with saying a lot of our followers out there don't know how they can help or participate in standing up for their freedoms. I believe the National Citizens Inquiry, like we just had the Emergency Act Inquiry, which went kind of sideways, which was predicted. We have to start holding people accountable. So the National Citizens Inquiry are looking to hear from medical professionals that would like to testify about the handling of the mandates and the emergency use order for the COVID-19 vaccine. We'd like to hear from witnesses. And that's the beginning to holding people accountable. So if you have something to offer and you want to be supportive, give us a like or give us a share, and have your voices heard so we can hold them accountable. So thank you for that opportunity to share that.
Thank you again, Dana Metcalf from not Nova Scotia, from Newfoundland, the East Coast of Canada. Closing remarks, Mr. Drew.
Yeah, just one point that I saw in the little clip you played there. Fear is their biggest, tool that they use. And you need to be fearless. I know it's hard for some people because they have, families and that sort of thing, but we're lucky because a lot of our group and our members are just completely fearless. We just don't care. We're not afraid of them, and they fear the fearless. So try and work on that. Don't be afraid. And one other thing is, we're really pushing this year about food security is they're using food as a weapon. So what you need to do is take that weapon out of their hands and start to provide for yourself, your family. You just start easy. You can do potatoes, chickens, vegetable garden, whatever it is. You need to take that power away from them. So if you follow us on social media, you'll see that we're pushing a lot for food security being the biggest issue of 2023, because I've seen people starving to death with my own eyes, and how you can get them to comply is with food. Okay,
right.
so we need to take that power away from them, and we need to stay in the fight by being able to provide for ourselves and our family. Thank you for having me.
If I can just quickly follow up on that, Drew, in 1960s, the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford actually came to the Philippines, started a institution called International Rice Research Institute. If you go to your grocery and you see this miracle brand on rice, that was a GMO that was produced in the 1960s in the Philippines. And for what reason? They say is to fight communism. When they develop this miracle rice, it spreads like wildfire on a small parcel of land. And for the Rockefellers and the Fords, they said that this is a weapon against communism. If they can use food as a weapon to fight against hunger, we know in Holodomor they also use hunger to fight against dissident. Last closing remark, Mr. Grizzly Patriot.
Yeah, so for me, it's all about taking back our responsibility, taking back, accountability, and holding our elected politicians responsible and accountable in a public way. Listen, they have us on a pretty dark path, and I know it's very frustrating for a lot of people that there's so many people still asleep. They're not going to allow, a lot of those people aren't going to allow someone like Mark Friesen to come and burst their bubble, because inside their bubble, everything is still okay. Unfortunately for those people, reality is going to burst their bubble for them. And when it does, we need to be a soft place for them to land. We need to be the place that they come to. So we need to plant seeds in everyone's conscience to understand, okay, when this does happen and they are directly affected by what they're trying to achieve through this agenda, we're going to have a whole lot of people forced to wake up and forced to try to understand what's happening in their world. That is going to happen. And this is where I believe, ultimately, at the end of the day, humanity is going to win this fight.
Amen.
We will win, because ultimately humanity has this innate sense that they want freedom. We want freedom. We want liberty. We want justice. We want sovereignty. And ultimately, what they're trying to achieve will not be able to be fully achieved, in my view, because humanity at some point is going to wake up and push back against all of this insanity. I fully believe that. It's just a matter of how much pain we're going to have to tolerate and endure before that happens.
Praise the Lord. I really totally 100% agree, Mark. I think it's our humanity. That's why we also have to fight against human 2.0 agenda, because that's when we lose touch of our humanity. When we have to fight for our humanity, because it's our humanity that will fight against tyranny. Chris, our British Canadian brother, please give us your beautiful accent last words.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to just say, hard times create strong men.
Amen.
And strong men create good times, and good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. The weak men have created the hard times that we're seeing now. The only way forward for us are for those hard times to create the strong men, and we can see what we're going to do moving forward. But this is going to take responsibility. People need to take responsibility, not allowing government to continue to make lots of laws that suppress our freedoms and our rights. And people need to step up to the plate now. We are at a period in time which is crucial to our future, and we are in a battle no end against tyranny with what we're seeing. So, we really need the strong men, the strong women to step up now and make a difference. And people need to keep an eye on those weak men that created those hard times for us.
Amen. Looking
Amen.
forward to have you back on, Chris. You bring a lot of value to the show. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
We'll see you again next time. Second to the last to do the closing, Doru. That's by design, because my question for your closing statement, maybe you want to touch different closing statement, but do we learn how to I'm here, everybody is restarting. Okay, do we learn to obey the system better? Should we be better citizens obeying the system, or should the system be reformed?
Well, that's a good question. It's like Mark said, the Western civilization created based on Judeo-Christian values is the best that we ever created. And we created it because we are taught by our Lord how to do it. Now, that being said, is this. Let's go to the Bible a bit. And then Joseph told his brothers, what you guys meant it for evil, God meant it for good.
Amen.
What I'm saying is that our Trudeau, our leader, our actor, said this to us 2 years ago. This is a great time or a great opportunity for a great reset. So they are talking about a great reset. The World Economic Forum is talking about great reset. Sleepy Joe or Joe Biden, whatever it is, his name is, he's talking about Build Back Better. Now, the good news is this crisis, this pandemic, they wanted to use it for evil, but we will use it for good. Because you see, until this pandemic came along, I talked to so many fellow Canadians. They didn't even care about simple questions like, what is the state? They couldn't even define what is the state. I was shocked. No one cared. And then all along, it comes the pandemic, and everybody starts to care, and they are paying attention. And I do believe we will turn it for good. Because what history teaches us, let's say one of the great evil of the 20th century was Adolf Hitler. He said this: we're going to build a Reich for 1,000 years, 1,000 years Reich. It lasted 12 years. It lasted 12 years, January 31st, 1933 to 1945. Our dictator in Romania, this November 22nd, 1989, he said this. There are still people in our country that believe that we will go back to the old ways, I will tell them this. We will never go back to the old ways. 1 month later, he was shot. He was tried and found guilty of high treason, and he was shot. So what I'm saying is that we will win, because we will turn it for good. Whatever these people are thinking to use it for evil, it will be on our side. Because now, like Mark said, he can go talking to people, he can show them what's actually happening, and people are starting to wake up. I have a good friend of mine who lives not far from me. He said to me, Doru, I cannot see what you see. And I said to him, of course you cannot see what I see, because you've been brainwashed by the government. You can't see. And he told me, I have a car. I have 3 cars. I have a house. I have everything that I need. Yes, you do, I told him. But that's not enough. The problem is you don't have only a physical life, only material things. You have a spiritual life, and that's under attack. And you'll realize sooner or later that your government will be your master, not your helper. So I know how it's gonna happen, how it's gonna end, because I've seen this movie before. The history is very clear in this respect. So we will win. The tyrannical, the tyrants, or the elites, the self-proclaimed elites, because they self-proclaim themselves elites. We are the experts. Listen to us and all this. This has happened in my country as well. They declare themselves the elites, the all-knowing people and all that. But we, in the end, we managed to get out, because we live the 15-minute city. I lived it. We were not allowed to move from one city to another. We were not allowed to move. We weren't. You couldn't. You just couldn't.
It just reminds me of Doug Ford saying you have to have justification to cross the provinces in the heavy lockdowns. That was kind of reminiscent. And also check on people on the road randomly. It's a good thing that the police chiefs in Ontario said, no way, we won't follow that tyrannical instruction. Always a pleasure to have someone like Doru, who grew up from behind the Iron Curtain, to give us this insight. Last but not the least, Mr. John Carpe, thank you for gracing us with your presence, and closing statements, please. Oh, Mr. Carpe, you are muted, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto your show, and I'm very grateful for what I've seen Canadians stepping up to the plate. It's sad how many Canadians in the last 3 years were cheerleaders for tyranny and gladly gave up their rights and freedoms, and that is not unique in history. You can see other countries and other places where a lot of people are not fans of freedom. But there's been a lot of support. I'm very grateful for all the Canadians that have donated to the Justice Centre to help us to carry on with our court cases and provide legal defense for people, and so many other worthwhile groups that are worthy of support, and people have stepped up to the plate. And I would just say that I'm confident we're going to win this battle in the long run, because truth will vanquish the lie, because freedom will win out over tyranny, and because justice will win out over injustice. And there are enough Canadians who understand that quitters never win and winners never quit.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to keep on fighting, because we know that it is better to die standing than to live on our knees. Thank you.
There you go, folks. It has been a Freedom Roundtable. On our panel today was Dana Metcalf from Newfoundland, Doro Gordon from Hamilton, Oakville, Ontario. Chris Smith joined us from Mexico City, who was a Nova Scotian for 10 years. Mr. Mark Friesen, the Grizzly Patriot from the beautiful province of Saskatchewan. Drew from a co-founder of the Veterans for Freedom from Ontario. And last but not the least, founder of JCCF, the president, Mr. John Carpe, right here on Freedom Fighter Radio, only here on The Ordinary Joe. I will be inviting you guys again. Maybe we'll have a part 2, because we only scratched the surface. Thank you very much for joining Freedom Fighter Radio, the Freedom panel here on The Ordinary Joe. God bless you all. Have a good night. We'll see you again next time. Folks of the audience, please share. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Just because it's a seller's market, it does not mean that it's not a good time for you, the buyer, to get into your dream home. The seller's market presents a unique opportunity not available during the buyer's market. Find out for yourself. Get the professional advice of an experienced, honest, Christian freedom-loving real estate professional. Call my friend, our sister in the fight for freedom, Madam Cheryl Severance of Century 21 at 905-646-2121, or check out her website at cheryl-severance-c21.ca. Fund the truth. Fund the unacceptable fringe views of the Freedom Fighter Radio broadcast. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada and also donate $3 per month and help us keep going and pushing back against the lies, the hate, and the fear-mongering of the legacy media. Patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Your $3 per month will help us set fire on the lies of the tyrants, the technocrats, and the internationalist social engineers. Patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Did you hear about the children's cough syrup shelf? They are mostly empty in the drugstores. Are you concerned? Do you feel the need to stockpile? As the world heads towards uncertainty, with every nation meeting its own challenges, Larks Medical are staged and ready to respond. Go to larksmedical.com. Provide them with your name, phone number, and email, and Larks will respond at their earliest possible availability to find solutions and ensure ample supply for your needs. Or email them directly at info@larksmedical.com. That's info@larksmedical.com.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary, the leader of the Independence Party of Alberta. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on The Ordinary Joe Show. Immediately out! Immediately go out and don't come back!
Imagine that the power grid was totally wiped by an EMP weapon of an enemy state. Your stress level will go to the roof, your patience will be tried, you will have to think about both your own and your complaining children's survival. If you don't survive, your children won't when they are left on their own. Teach your children how to have the mentality of being survivors through a fun, children-friendly guided outdoor adventures with basic survivor mindfulness integrated in the fun outing activity. Call my friends Ornell and Victoria, who are experienced survivors. Call them at 905-252-8009 or email them at northernpacificcottages@gmail.com. A disturbing news. Doctors administer certain drugs even after the family have rejected it. Why? Because hospitals can charge $3,000 a pop for it. Meanwhile, they hid the fact that cheaper alternatives are available and it only costs cents. Do you know if you are paying the right price for your current prescription? Have you researched if there are cheaper yet equally effective alternatives? Call Shinlaza Pharmaceuticals at 1-800-206-0051 or email at info@shinlaza.com for a free consultation. Shinlaza Pharmaceuticals is owned and operated by a freedom fighter of the Freedom Community in Ontario.
We have a brand new podcast in collaboration with one of our very important collaborators. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce our main collaborator for a brand new podcast, Enemies of the State, the New World Order. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Goru Gordon.
Yes, and to put it simply, the recipe is always there. Create a crisis. You have to present there is a crisis in society. In order for the state to go bigger and to grow, you always have to threaten people or to instill fear. You have to be fearful of greedy capitalists or the greedy businessman who wants to take money away from you.
Hello, friends. I am Derek Sloan, the leader of the Ontario Party. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Canada podcast, only here on The Ordinary Joe Show.
Hello, folks. I have to apologize to some of our viewers and listeners from Rumble. There's no way to integrate your comments, but I think I found a way. Just to, I want to acknowledge everybody who engaged with, and again, when we have a panel discussion, folks, it's a little bit hard to give everybody equal opportunity to speak. Plus, we have the live audience. I was thinking of bringing some questions, but there's just so many things going on, so I have to apologize that I was not able to bring in any live audience. But I'll have an opportunity right now to actually present on the screen. I never done this before, but I think this is a good way to show our Rumble listeners. Give me a second here. There you go. I think I can share the screen on Rumble. So I'm not playing. It's just that when you're not playing Rumble, what it has is just the thumbnail. We have here Jesse Jennings. Shout out to Jesse Jennings, who left a lot of comments here. Celebrate 123. You left a few comments as well. Doing S13. Thank you for your comment. Ardal. And okay, so let's pick one from each friends here who left a few messages on our Rumble. For some reason, Celebrate 123 was saying thank you, Jesse Jennings. I'll just pick one from each guys, folks, because I'm sorry that I couldn't do this during the actual show. So this is like our extended ending here. Jesse Jennings says, if you guys want a fun watch, collative learning, the Gold Watch tells you what is Pulp Fiction briefcase. Uniparty rule thanks Obama for corrupting almost every agency, including the IRS, USPS, and Medicare. Looks like brother Jesse is from the United States. Celebrate 123 was saying the reset means China. Let's get a Whittle. Thank you for putting this podcast together. Thank you, Whittle. Please share. Our link on Rumble is barely censored. Even if you take the link from Rumble and share it on Facebook or Twitter, that will really help us a lot. Because even though we have 100,000 on Facebook, they still shadow ban us very heavily. Doings 13 says tip volume leveling. Yep, thank you for your tip. Celebrate 1, 2, 3. What is the rule of law on self-protection with any means if they are trying to harm you? That was my question to the panel. Who else do we have here? Ardal. Yes, JJ. Yes, Tio and Van. All right. So what about our Bello, Ray, and Donna? We are not afraid to wake people up. However, those people will put more faith into fact checkers, sadly. So I'll get to some of your comments, and I apologize that I couldn't do it while the show was running, folks. Peter Yetman was just saying some highs to some of the members of the panel. Josie Jean Barnes was saying much love. Hi, freedom people. Catherine O'Neill was saying hello from French River, Ontario. Penny Jones joined from Peterborough. Bellows, Ray, and Donna. Romania is outwardly calling Turkey earthquakes and work of USA HARP. Yeah, I think I saw some coverage. They were saying that maybe that was a fabricated trigger. Catherine O'Neill, this government has already limited our rights in several areas. Again, sorry, Kathy, that would have been a perfect comment to bring up while the show was happening. Luke Thompson was saying 15-minute cities have come from Rousseau's idea. That man is free, but everywhere he is in chains. Thank you for sharing that. Christian Kevin are saying, why are people not watching this? Christian, we are, depends on where you're watching it. It looks like if you're watching it from one of our small page, you can only see the number of views from the page you're tuning in. You cannot see the conglomerate or the combined view count. I myself cannot see the view count from other channels like Odyssey. It doesn't sync up with our StreamYard. Odyssey, Brighteon, Rumble, and brand new YouTube, they don't sync the view count and also the comments. So that's why I'm trying to do this with Rumble. Catherine O'Neill was saying people have been visited at their homes in Canada by police for criticizing Trudeau on social media. See, that's why I asked the question, when is that line actually crossed from a legal standpoint? Kevin Godat was giving us all of these beautiful icons. Christian Kevin, it's an easy word to say. So folks, thank you for tuning in. That was the show. Stay tuned because we are going to have part 2. Maybe not exactly the same members of the panel, but we are going to bring in some of the regulars. Most likely, Chris will be regular. Hopefully Mark can come back. Doru for sure. And whoever else wants to come in. But for our next Freedom panel, it will be like 5 or less. Because anything over 5 is a little too many for me to try and kind of manage the traffic, the flow. So that's it, folks. Tune in, share. We'll see you again tomorrow morning for Cafe Freedom, and I will weigh in on some of the. I will cut some of the snippets from this live cast tonight, and we'll cover some of those tomorrow on Cafe Freedom. God bless you all. Have a good night. Take care. Share. Send us some love. Send us some stars. Subscribe. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. You've been listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show. See you next time. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Freedom Fighter Radio, what is up? Whoa!
Shout out to Freedom Fighter Radio. And Joe, you're doing great work, brother, and I love it. All right? Always.
Make sure you listen to the Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Show.
I'm on Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Joe Show. That's quite a mouthful. Yes.
Hey guys, this is Chris Guy. Listen to Freedom Fighter Radio. They're here today, back in the blue, and so am I.
please consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.